Good morning. This is Friday Focus. Chris Jones here from Smart Curriculum and the Smart Curriculum Network. Thank you for joining us this morning. If you're watching live, I hope you're enjoying your half term if you're in the UK, or you're working if you're further afield. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your watching. If you're watching the recorded version, you know now we're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, and versions of the podcast are now going out on Substack. So please do like, share, and subscribe wherever the buttons are below. Get involved in the conversation. That's the important thing for us. This is a conversation about an important social structure and the whole of the education system we should be learning as we go. My guest this morning, I'll leave her to introduce her journey, but Mina Wood has a long history of important roles within education, and I invited her to come and talk today. This whole idea of quality is questioning, or is there as a question for all of us, and I just thought this conversation would be a valuable one to add to the piece. So please welcome to the stage, Mina. Mina, thank you for joining us this morning. I appreciate you being here. I know it's early on a Friday morning, and schools in the UK are on half term. So, well, actually, having said that, many are various different times, but we know obviously here we're getting ready for the SE season, so people are sort of resting before the beginning of that part of the school year. Mina, please introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about your journey to this point. What have you been involved in? What have you done for people that know you or haven't met you before?
Good morning, Chris, and good morning to all of you who are listening in, as Chris said, early in the morning. And I very much appreciate you listening in. Yes, my journey has been a long one, and I think I could honestly say I have straddled the whole range of education. My specialism is in secondary education, but I started off as a secondary school teacher in teaching French, so a languages teacher. And actually the school I started teaching in was a school that, as anecdotal, Rachel Reeves went to, our Chancellor. So yes, she did. I missed her by about 2 years, I think a few years. I left before she arrived. But I think had I been there, I would have been teaching her French. So that's a very interesting thought for me. So anyway, moving on, I left school after about 8 years, and I decided to move into FE, further education. And it was simply because I wanted to teach English as a foreign language, or a second language to second language speakers. It was at a time in the 80s when there were a lot of migrants coming to the country, as we all know has been the case for forever really in the UK. But at that point we had a lot of boat people from Vietnam and various other countries with conflicts. So I was teaching in FE and managing departments, and I worked across 3 very large FE colleges in London, and worked my way from lecturer to head of department, then finally to principal of adult college in the southeast of London. So that was my foray into education, and what I believed as a result of that at that point, I wanted to go and see the wider picture, the national picture. So I actually applied to Ofsted as an HMI, and I was successful in about 2002. And I joined Ofsted, but in those days, because my background was more recently in FE, I joined the part of Ofsted that was looking at further education and skills. Brilliant experience, absolute privilege to inspect a wide range of institutions, including youth offenders, colleges, obviously, but work-based providers. It was a really wide-ranging remit, which I did for about 4 years. And then we had to decide whether we stayed in schools or colleges, FE, and I decided to move across the schools part of Ofsted, obviously with my background in schools. So I then worked in school, worked as an HMI with schools, and again, complete privilege, and finished my tenure in 2013. But in that time, I gained experience of inspection across schools, colleges, primary and secondary, and even early years. Sometimes I was leading inspections where there was a nursery attached to the school. But, you know, the most enduring memory of school improvement, as we call it, as you know, people call it, but I'm not sure it is school improvement. It's about picking the best that you see in schools and capturing that and then sharing it across the sector. That thematic surveys that we used to do and working with schools to bring them out of categories, so to speak. But those were probably the most enduring memories for me, because they weren't judgmental. They were actually going into schools, and, you know, as I said, it was a privilege to be allowed into these schools, seeing the fantastic practice that was in there, or actually seeing a school on its journey from where it had been, perhaps not, you know, where it wanted to be, to a place where the school had really worked so hard to move eons and had arrived at a fantastically positive place in their journey. So once I left Ofsted, I did do some work with schools. I continue to do work with schools who requested me to, but then I moved, and then I was successful in becoming a head teacher. In a very tough, challenging school. And if I can say this much, when I arrived in the school, there were 1,000 FTEs in the school when I arrived there. So this was something about the ethos of the school, the values and so on. And as it was part of a MAT, I had to work very, very hard to establish what I felt were the values that I wanted from my students and from the staff, very importantly, and the context, the cultural context, and the parents. So I worked very hard in that sort of across the three sectors, the three stakeholders, if you like. Once I left in 2019, I then decided to go back to what I really enjoyed doing, which is writing. My first book was in 1995, and that was around FE. But then I wrote a book called Secondary Curriculum Transformed, which has been for me quite key. It's the fulcrum of all my experiences that I've captured in that book. So again, if I come back to one of the most enduring memories, for me, it was seeing in FE the failure, the 1/3 who fail school without their English and maths, and without doing very well in the academic sort of side of things in their GCSEs, and arriving in FE for a second chance. And that was key. You know, for me, that was really what I was doing in FE. So they were going into my vocational departments, for example, hospitality, catering, hairdressing, whatever. Now, that to me underpins the work I've been doing the work I did in the book, because it was about saying, look, if our curriculum is not fit for purpose and our assessment process is not fit for purpose, what is it we should be doing? So I did a lot of research in systems in other countries, also in the UK, where schools were really doing it well, and captured this, I believe, in the book. And since then, I've been doing work in Dubai, in the Emirates, over 3 years, actually looking at systems and looking at how you can improve the quality of the learning of your students, and in fact the culture and context of the school, in looking at how you establish those values and bringing everyone together so that it becomes cohesive and not fragmented. And most importantly, you're releasing the potential of each child and creating opportunities so children are not failing, which sadly in the system we have now is the case. So that's a very potted version of what I've been doing.
Well, let's draw out some of those elements that you. I just you ended there with a statement. It's that any system that's put in place that enables a child to fail has failed. We've discussed this. You've said it. What do you think are the characteristics, particularly? I mean, you've seen that in your journey. You know, so this group of learners that get to 16 and they go to FE with that sense of, well, I've failed, and you know that, and then they pick up. What is it about that process that so sparked you? I mean, because obviously you made that decision to go into FE to benefit, and you know it isn't just about the vocational curriculum, because as you've sort of emphasised, core skills matter. They're the things that are going to be the educated class when we've got this group of learners that can read and write and add up and are confident with it. What was it you saw particularly in that journey that prompted you to make that move?
Yes, I think in the journey, what I felt was that what we actually lack here in the education system are pathways. For me, what I believe very strongly is in those countries where you have a pathways curriculum, for example, in Estonia, where children do follow academic studies, but they also follow vocational studies. And basically that means that, you know, we have sort of children are able to move between those pathways and are able to develop their, you know, their studies in that way. Now, that for me was, so what we've got in this country is school is generally geared up to children moving into academia, i.e. A-levels eventually. I know BTECs are there. I know we do have apprenticeships, but they are not, it is a hierarchical system, and they are not promoted to children in the same way through careers and advice and guidance as the academic subjects. So children necessarily are shoehorned down the road of academia because ultimately the golden standard in this country is knowledge, and which will lead you to a university course. So that's where it essentially goes wrong, is it comes back to the values that I was talking about, the culture. And if you have a country where, you know, you are looking at the broader child, you're looking at somebody who has potential to achieve, to contribute to society, to be productive, to go into jobs, you know, which they want to go into, to develop their aspirations. Hence the title of my book, Secondary Curriculum Transform, Enabling All to Achieve.
Yeah.
Then you've got a curriculum that will fit that purpose and an assessment process that will allow those children or young people to achieve their aspirations. So in that way, a pathways curriculum, which is adaptive, will enable that to happen, rather than you start from, you know, primary and secondary. Primary is very different. I can talk about that, but I want to just focus on secondary. So for those 5 years, it is pure academia. It is rote learning. It is something that you have to do to get into, you know, to pass your exams, to move on to A-levels, or BTECs by then. But by then, children or young people by 16 have already been so frustrated in their journey coming to that point. By following academia, the vocational side or the creative or the technical almost gets diluted. And I've seen it so much when I was an HMI. I've seen it as a head teacher, when I was going, you know, visiting schools and so on. It is so frustrating when you see children like that. And it is no coincidence, Chris, that we have an exponential rise in exclusions, in persistent absence, and in children actually actively voting with their feet and leaving school. There is something not quite right there. And we have the unhappiest children or young people in Europe, you know, by the OECD indices of that come out around mental health. So there are a number of evidential indices or pointers that show us that something is not working. And it is about, for me, essentially always doesn't come back to, well, that's how we treat behaviors or pastoral. Let's look at fundamentally what children are doing with their time when they're in school. Are they engaged? Are they following something relevant and meaningful? Are they enjoying their learning? Those are the questions we should be asking ourselves.
And there is some. I spoke to someone who was talking about. In fact, I think it was last guest, Dr. Tazos, was mentioning the using PALS, the sort of NFER data that were actually tying up the understanding of children's engagement in school with all of the other, so whether it be PECS, permanent exclusion, whether it be attendance, and the attendance project that's gone on in the UK. I've written on it recently just to simply say, if we don't give children reason to be there, if we're not using those pull factors, whatever we do is just a push factor, the criminalising, the court cases, whatever. It's not fun dealing with the fundamental issue. I think there's two things from what you said that I know they resonate for me in the work that I do with school leaders. Particularly I was in a school. I won't mention where in the country because it was a conversation that was intended to raise a question. But a head teacher very clearly saying, very proudly saying about the school and children moving through the school, and said, 50% of our children go to university. Well, that's wonderful. But my question was, what about the other 50%? And the answer was the bit that really got me. The answer was simply, no one's ever asked me that question. I don't know. And it was just that, exactly what you're saying. The academia, the academics in us so concentrate on that idea of, university is the destination for this educated group of learners that we don't think about another part, and we don't think about that positively in a way of constructing something that's successful all. The other thing, I just sort of summarising that part, but this thing about adapted curriculum. You refer to I talk a lot about adaptive curriculum. We put the emphasis on adaptive teaching, so teachers in the classroom managing this almost impossible task. It's not. They do brilliantly in it, and whether we call it differentiation, adaptive teaching is different now from that. This idea that one size doesn't fit all, the journey. Where are there good examples? You talked about Estonia. We know that there are other systems in Europe that think about adaptive learning pathways. Just to tell us a little bit more about that, because that's really interesting, because it's not what we have here in the UK.
No. So something that I actually did in my school, if we're talking about learning pathways, was because the problem we have is that the children who are most affected by a curriculum which isn't working for them are going to be children who are neurodiverse, children with particular special needs, and so on. And in particular, literacy and numeracy. So if you think back to primary now, and the 1/3 who actually don't get even their reading scores up, as they should, they are ending up in school as well. And in year 7, they are unable to access the secondary curriculum. Now, I had more than, I think we had in our school, more than our fair share of children who had come from primary schools where, they hadn't, or backgrounds, context, whatever their particular context, disadvantaged and so on, or with special needs, and some had some severe special needs. But they could not access the secondary curriculum, but they were with us in year 7, sitting alongside some very bright pupils. So what we did was we developed a Key Stage 3, and we called it an Engage and Achieve unit. And what this did, I employed teachers who were English, maths, science, humanities teachers. And these children went into the unit for about the first, if you like, you can call it a transition, you can call it induction, call it what you will. But what it meant was they went into the unit working alongside these teachers, working with these teachers in small groups. And what that meant was that they could focus on the literacy and numeracy aspects of developing those skills to access the secondary curriculum.
Yeah.
So they did that up until from about September to the half term, really, in the autumn half term. And they were then able to go back into lessons. That didn't mean that they were then fixture in that lesson, because we knew some of them had such need that they needed to be out of the lessons and still pursuing a different kind of curriculum. So we had timetables, we sort of bespoke timetabling for some of our children who really required that. So they were able to come back into the unit and work alongside subject teachers. So this wasn't a support through a TA. We did have TAs in that room, but they were not the principal people who worked with the students. And this is where I personally have a problem with inclusion. We talk about inclusion, but actually, how inclusive is a classroom where you have a class teacher who's happily teaching a group of, 20, 25, 30 children, and a TA or 2 or 3 TAs who are kind of sitting by Nelly with 3 or 4 children? And then all that seems to happen in the best practice, what should happen is planning between the teacher and the TA before the lessons, and it should be built into the curriculum. That becomes adaptive teaching of another model.
Yes.
However, what does happen in reality in many schools is the TA will simply sit in the lesson and so-called help the pupil to do what they need to do. And I've seen examples. I've been in lessons where the pupil's sitting there looking out the window and the TA's writing the work for them. And so that is at its worst. But there is some marvelous work going on with TAs. I get that. But I think if you're going to really go down the road of inclusion, then what you do is make every teacher a teacher who is able to teach neurodiverse. So that becomes adaptive. And in Singapore, teachers, in fact, have to be trained, and they carry on, once a year, they get professional development updates on actually working with children who are neurodiverse. So their teaching has to incorporate that. Now, when we talk about adaptive teaching, adaptive pedagogies, then it is that it's aiming for the highest, aiming for the top. We start from the top. We don't differentiate. We start from the top. This is what we want all children to achieve. And then it's about how we're going to enable them to achieve that, rather than we're going to differentiate because we know so-and-so is, has got so-and-so dyslexia, so-and-so has got this. So I'm going to set you a separate worksheet. I'm going to set you one. It's about actually using a model of, this is what we want you to achieve. We're now going to engage on that, and we're going to have, particular aspects helping you with that, but we're going to review it. We're not going to stick with that. We're going to review where you're at, and then you may actually have changed and actually moved on it more faster than we thought you were going to. And therefore now you can, go back down this road. So it's really about creating adaptive pathways in the classroom as well, and using all resources. And the other aspect I was going to say to you was that AI particularly now comes into its own with this kind of teaching, because if you've got AI, you can use that facility to have some children working on particular, areas with AI, where the AI software will help the child review their work, will give feedback, and so on. And the teacher can then go around looking at different children, but then come back and actually have a dialogue with the child about where they're at, rather than the teacher or the TA sitting there going through this painstakingly with the student. It accelerates the process of learning in many ways, if it's used correctly. And there's a huge caveat there, about training and so on. But I do think, we're not using all the tools we have at our disposal to really facilitate adaptive curriculum or adaptive teaching. And can I just say, with the model we had, what was interesting, that unit was used after school by Key Stage 4 students who wanted to do additional work.
Yep.
Used it for our GCSEs, but it wasn't just year 11s, it was year 10s. And there was actually a waiting list for children to come in there because they were so keen to catch up on areas, so we had a little group of kids who were doing an inspector calls, which on specific aspects because they couldn't seem to get it in the lessons. So
Yeah.
they worked alongside the teacher, actually going over various aspects in this little hub.
Isn't that's the key though, isn't it, Mina? That
Yeah.
capturing their desire to learn, to their passion themselves, and then when they get something, whether it be because they see I want to be successful at the next hurdle at the exam, or it's just simply I want to engage with this. This is something I'm interested in.
Exactly.
It gets us into the inquiry mode rather than just the acquisition mode. I'm just acquiring knowledge, but I want to understand it and I want to see how it's going to shape my future, and I'm interested. That passion for learning.
It's the application of that knowledge which is important. And what's interesting, Chris, is when we looked at these pupils, these students, some of those had been excluded before when they couldn't get it. Right? They couldn't get it, so their behaviour they kicked off and they were thrown out of the lessons. And now those same students were coming in and actually wanting to learn because they realised that we'd put resources at their disposal. And I did a lot of PR with parents to say, if your child was in a private school, they'd be paying for this additional, tuition, if you like. And you're getting it for free, so use it. It's yours. You use it. It's your school. You come here and benefit from it. So
absolutely,
yeah.
What did you see different between? I'm just interested in what you've described is a very typical response in the secondary sector, and I've seen, like you, many versions of that the unit, the room. I've heard it called the inner college or the bridge, or there are lots of things that people.
And there was somebody that wanted to call it that in my school as well, but we didn't because it was on a bridge. It went off on a bridge area. Yeah.
I just that I get the professionals' view. They want to identify. It's the reason. It's the climate that they're creating. It's the accessibility for learners that matters.
Yeah.
In a sense, and again, it is that inclusion. But inclusion doesn't mean that they're in a mainstream classroom all the time. It's making sure that they have a curriculum that's right for them. And I will say, that's focused on the neurodiverse and those that are struggling, but there are also questions around the high performing learners and whether the ones.
That's what I was about to say to you.
So go on, you take that on.
No, and that's exactly what I was about to say to you, because not all the children who are coming to us then, certainly after school, they were not the ones who were just the ones who'd failed. So we had children there who wanted to do more than, who were really keen, was sort of stretching themselves to get to the next level up, if you like. And they wanted additional, help or assistance. And they didn't, because we didn't, do you know what it was? We did not create stereotypes, and we didn't say, it didn't become a sort of nerdy place to go, and it didn't become one for thicko kids, if you like. We didn't use labeling, and we did not, we came away from labeling. Labeling is something I detest. I don't even like the term send. As we were saying, Chris, in the Emirates, they talk about students of determination or people of determination, which is so positive. But so we actually took away the labels and made it a resource that children could access. So, obviously we did end up having more children wanting to access it than, but they enjoyed being there, and they got something out of it, and we evaluated it and constantly looked at how we could improve it and so on. But I think one of the things that I was going to say was about the values. You asked me at the beginning, what are the areas that I feel really make a difference in a school. And I honestly think, in terms of not just school, but the government values, that drive what we're doing in schools, I don't feel we're being driven by values. We're not being driven by values, actually. We are being driven by, if you like, this notion that children need knowledge, and that's really seems to be the be all and end all. Now, if you look at a values-driven curriculum, it is about saying, what are the attributes and attitudes you want to see in your learners? And for me, this is about adaptive teaching, and everything we've talked about is about flipping it on its head.
Mm.
And it's about moving from teaching, not talking about teaching, but talking about learners and learning.
Mm.
And if you look at, if you could just pop that slide up with the big wheel, that's the Thomas Tallis wheel. It's a
Yeah.
school in South
Let me
London.
just find it. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
This one.
Now, this one, I don't know how well you can see it, but this school I know well because I was principal. I was working in a college just down the road. I was a senior leader in a college just down the road, and so I knew the estate where the children were coming from. A very tough school, very challenging, but the head teacher of this school has created this pedagogy wheel, which basically she has three cornerstones in teaching and learning: the threshold concepts, the powerful knowledge, and habits of the mind. Now, if you look at what's happened there, rather than talk about, if you could just, enlarge on that, Chris, so
Yeah.
I can see it as well. Thank you. So if you look at the outer wheel, what that is around what the teacher might do: question starters, open-ended investigations, and so on. Those might be the activities in the lesson. And then if you look at the inner one, which you can't probably see very clearly, but it is really about how that translates into what the students will be doing. So question starters be wondering and questioning, exploring and investigating, challenging, and so on. And it's about, and this is actually on their website. And, you can go in and have a look, and there's a whole toolkit there that goes with that. But you can see the values that the school wants the children to have, to develop their attributes is imaginative, inquisitive, collaborative, persistent, and disciplined. Now, there are not many schools. Schools talk about their values. Sorry, Chris, if you want to just,
yeah.
schools talk about their values, and you can see values on every website of every school. But I've never not seen many schools that go beyond that and actually say, well, this is what it means for our children. This is what it means for our staff. This is what it means for our culture, our ethos, our professional development for our staff. When we do our professional development, we're focusing on imaginative, how our learners can become more imaginative. Now, what I did when I was researching all this is in the book as well. And what I did when I was researching this, I looked beyond that and also looked at my Dubai experience and looked at what was happening there. Now, the IB, the International Bank, as we know, is very much focused on learning. So what I then did was I thought, well, if you are looking at learning, then what you need to be doing is translating this kind of model where you're looking at the values back into the classroom. So when you're looking at learning, if anyone's looking at learning, whether someone's coming in and actually looking at what's going on in the classroom, or the teacher's wanting to do that, then you can take the teaching standards. So very good on the teaching standards. And Chris, I've got two slides there. I think one's on teaching standards right at the end, possibly.
Yeah, let me find it.
Yeah.
Just trying to find the tables. Just one second.
I think it's the last two slides. Oh no, this
next one.
Right at the end. That's it. That's the one.
This one.
Go back. Yeah, the National Teaching Standards. Now, all teachers know this, or they should. They should know it. This is what in a sense, the appraisal process for teachers is based on, and so on and so forth, and the professional development process. And you can see: set, promote, demonstrate, adapt, make, manage, so on. What I did, I took each of these standards, and if you move to the next slide, and I turned it into student learning standards. So for each of those, I created what I would expect to see in the students. So you can see each of them has, I don't know, let's just pick one: responds proactively to self-assessment, peer and teacher feedback, understands success criteria, responds to dialogic feedback, and requests clarification. Now, that I've been in lessons where the teachers set up peer assessment, but when you go and ask the pupils, do you actually understand the success criteria? What are I can see you've written loads of stuff underneath your buddy's work, but do you understand exactly what it is you're saying? Does your buddy understand it? And there is no understanding. They're literally they're literally going by what the teachers ask them to do.
Yeah.
So the depth of understanding won't be there. Now, I would question if a young person, a child, is actually learning rather than being taught, then the learning should be a proactive process, and they should be taking agency of learning. They should have agency of learning, and they should be able to do what is in LS6, for example. And you, as a teacher, I should be able to be looking at that and thinking, are they doing that? And again, this is about adaptive teaching. If you've got a class where there were children in the same class who were really good at it, and there were children who weren't. Now, if the purpose of that exercise or activity was LS6, then surely that's an attribute that we should be bringing out, because it's absolutely key that children should be able to self-assess and peer assess and understand the success criteria. Otherwise, how are they going to produce their own work? Yeah. So this is something.
And isn't it that, so we see so many teachers that have got so the concentration, rightly, in terms of the system that we have, they're so concentrating on acquisition of knowledge and stuffing a curriculum full of, we must do this and we must do this. I hear lots of teachers, well, I can't do anything else because I've got to get through the content, where this that you're describing here is really deep learning. It's really deep, getting a child so they're really understanding success criteria is significantly different from they can list 10 rivers internationally or whatever it might be. I mean, that's a reductive kind of example, but that knowledge acquisition is not the end of learning.
No. And this is where this is where we could make such a fundamental difference in schools if we actually flipped from teaching to learning. Yeah. And when, if you have observations of teachers, which I know teachers don't like, and they shouldn't like it particularly, because why are we observing them? We should be observing the impact of their teaching on the learning. So that's where you will start looking in depth at this. And for me, quality assurance, when you're going into lessons, is about this. It's not about looking at the teacher, and whatever comes out of this can be fed back to the teacher in a positive way that, do you know so-and-so, and these group of pupils actually don't know you. And this is exactly what I did with this teacher when I went into this lesson. But did you know that those pupils there really did know the success criteria? So it would have been nice to have set up a follow-up activity where they speak about it. The two groups get together, we pair up those that do and those that don't, and get them to actually open up and unpick before they attempt to start doing their peer assessment. So that's where it becomes adaptive, but no, what actually happened in that lesson, as an example, was once they'd done it and gone through the motions of, I've written this under yours and I've given you a 6 and I've given you a 7, the teacher just went on the board and said, right, okay, this is what a number 7 looks like. This is what number 6, these are. And I was thinking, well, so where's the thinking for the children? Where's the reasoning? Where's the critical thinking? All of those thinking skills, they just weren't there. The collaborative learning, the actual oracy skills even, it just wasn't there. Yeah. And I noticed when I was going around, some of the children were just chatting. They weren't actually, because they were going through it by rote. So they were just chatting to one another. That's the point I would make, that, which is very, sorry, you asked me about other places. I mean, when I was in the Emirates, because it was the IB, this would have been the kind of activity they would have had to have done, because they would have to discuss and explain and articulate why they felt that success criteria was better than that one. Now, when I used to ask the children there, they could tell me, most of them, not all. Here, I couldn't even get the brightest ones to really, they were very underconfident and kind of, looking at me as if to say, I'm not sure if I'm saying the right thing. Children shouldn't be thinking, I'm not sure I'm saying, so I'm not going to say anything. That isn't the way that learning should be. You should be learning from your mistakes, learning from others, adapting, modeling, and so on. So, yeah, I think that would make a huge difference in terms of our flipping of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I liked particularly something you said there, Mida, because you were one of the things that we talk about within the work that we do in school still is considering from a leadership point of view the lived experience of the child. What does the lived experience like? And I could just see, the teacher writing on the board that if you're at level 6, you're this. And if you think about the child, they're going to go. This could be lesson 1 on a Thursday morning, and they've got 4 other lessons to follow. By the time they get a chance to reflect, if ever they do, on what you'd put on the board, they've had 4 other lessons with a similar kind of activity. When do you get the chance to do that kind of reflection with them, other than doing it there, and then actually developing it with them? Don't just tell them, they need to do it, because their lived experience is going to be crammed with so much else in the day.
Well, I think one thing to say as well, which again comes back to the labeling bit, which I honestly is my personal pet hate, I think. If you're going to go down the road of this is what a 6 looks, so you can see again, Chris, what you're doing is reinforcing you over there, you're a 6, you'll stay a 6. It's setting those glass ceilings for children as well. It's not just, because you're not allowing that reflection at that point. You're quite right. And that articulation and that self-expression. It's not about saying, it is, you can say this is what a 6 looks like, but, all right, but really is that important at this point? What is important is the child can move away from a 6 to the 7 and knows how to do it, because they understand the depth, they understand the success criteria, and they've talked about it and reflected on it. But actually and I have friends who work in HE as lecturers, and every year they will say to me, our first year students, they will come to us, and the first thing they want is for us to put examples of essays up on the book, to give them examples of essays, because that's what they've been used to. And we will say to them, no, we're not going to give you examples. You should write the essay. And then, but can't you tell us what we need to do to get to this level or that level? And it was, my friends was, no, we can't tell you that. Isn't how it works in PG. So that's the difference, that we're not enabling agency of learning. And it is, I think, one of the biggest issues we have in education at the moment. And sadly, I fear with the current trends that we've got going, I'm not sure the curriculum review will develop that in any way further. And neither will Ofsted in terms of what they're looking at when they go into lessons. They can drive it actually and make sure that we're looking at learning. And there was a time when I was there, I was very lucky. We did look at learning and not teaching. But I'm not sure entirely that's going to happen now. Hopefully it will, one can only hope.
We've talked quite a lot. Is there anything of your, because I want to center on, people, you've captured a lot of this thinking and more in your book. So it's a secondary curriculum transformed, enabling all to achieve. Mina writing with Nick Haddon. And there are some really good examples from a number of schools that you hands-on, proven examples. Is there anything else from the slide? The slides that you is there anything else that you wanted to sort of center on before, because our time is zipping away?
I know it is, yeah. I mean, I think for me, there are a number of if you just want to just quickly put the slides up on the Padlet, the hinge question, we can just quickly, take me a minute to just have them there. So the visuals, I think, speak for themselves. And I'm sure there are people who are actually, so the first one is actually moving from, you can see that sums it up, doesn't it? I see you did well in school. What real world skills do you have? Tests, I can take tests. It sums up what we said right at the beginning. That's it. And on the left-hand side, we have what I've put in the book, which are the skills that children, all of us need in everyday life, as well as in work, in training, in education. And I just want to say...
Sorry, go on. No,
I was going to say, Albert Einstein, very famously, in 1921, which was interesting, 100 years before I wrote the book, and that actually inspired me to go down this road. He said, education is not the learning of facts, but the training of minds to think. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And then he went on to say, education is what remains after we have forgotten what we learnt at school. Now, if we think about this chap here, tests, I can take tests. So he doesn't say what he remembers from those tests, but he says, I have the ability to learn something and then produce it in a test. So that's the first thing. But if I can just move very quickly onto those other slides that show the different, if we move, keep going. That's another example of a school with values, but yeah, we just keep going. Sorry, just move on a little. This is more about interdisciplinary learning. So this is around the graphic organizers. Schools at the moment feature large on knowledge organizers where they learn the facts, Chris, as you said, the 10 rivers and wherever, whatever. This is about thinking of an octopus with 8 tentacles, but actually 9, because the central one, the brain, is actually the command center. And each of those tentacles can work on their own, just as our subjects do, silo learning. We do, don't we, with history and so on. But if you were to actually develop what you want to do, which is here in terms of citizenship, civil rights, you can use all the information children are learning from different areas, for example, history, if they're doing suffragettes or whatever, climate change in geography and so on, and you can develop conceptual thinking. So cross-curricular, interdisciplinary. Now it can be done, and it is done. If you move on to the next slide, I think it shows you a school which is in the book, Turton School in Derbyshire, where they have started to look at, they did when I was writing the book, and that was 4 years ago, cross-curricular skills. So they looked at matching up how these different areas will work. That's the trouble. We don't have a cross-curricular timetable. With the IB, you do. So children start seeing the relevance and meaning from subject to subject. As you said, Chris, they don't just move through these subjects and think one is irrelevant to the other. So if we move on, the flipped classroom, I love, because I think, again, AI comes into its own. Let's get children to look at, get a question across to them and get some children to look at one aspect of it through AI. Why not? Let's get the knowledge out there, and another group doing the same. But when they get into the classroom, they have to discuss. They have to actually look at what's been written and be critical. Start being critical about the knowledge that they've actually gained through AI, because it won't be correct. A lot of it won't be correct. And they have to start explaining and then looking at joining up the knowledge so that they can write something which is original and authentic of their own.
But that's one of the deeper things about critical thinking. I know that Dr. Tazos, when we were talking about IB last week, they were saying, critical thinking is central. Another guest that we had some time ago, Steve Cook from ITT, works internationally. Yeah. He was saying, putting children in unfamiliar circumstances tests the knowledge that they have, because they can then apply it. And that's, what you're saying here is children coming to the classroom and testing what people have found. So that, why do you believe that? Why do you believe that? I've found this. Why is it different? That's deeper than just simply, I received this from the teacher and take it as rote. That's it.
Yeah,
that's a deeper.
So they can see the nuances, that if you ask the question of AI in one way, they'll get one answer. And if you ask it another way, ChatGPT, for example, ChatGPT is very generalized, though it's not specific, not bespoke to particular, area contexts, and so you will get a very general answer. But then it's up to the children, and that's where the critical thinking, we talk about friend or foe. For me, it's a poison challenge, AI, because it can be both if it's not used, with that critical thinking.
Actually, on that question of AI, because I've been talking, it's an interest and I use it a lot.
Yeah.
I was actually talking to someone and saying, actually, in the international environment, please, we don't want ChatGPT, OpenAI. It's written by white blokes. We want something that's culturally, right for our area. And exactly this. If you do a search and you look for different voices, it's actually quite interesting to explore and then to use that, so different tools that would give you a slightly different perspective. The typical write a poem, and it's usually about a woman. If you just ask it to, it's very gender specific.
It is. And
really interesting stuff.
ethnicity specific as well.
Absolutely.
So it's very narrow, and that's the
Mm.
trouble we have with it. But sadly, it's there, and children are using it. You know, very many children are using it now. And the sadness we have is that unless a school has got an AI policy, they're not going to necessarily, teachers not going to know whether it is AI derived or not. So yeah, if we just move on.
Shout out to, while I move on, shout out to Mark Anderson and the work on AI policy, because he's doing some sterling work across the country. And I think we need to get that embedded in schools, because it really does cover.
Fantastic. Well, I wrote an article on it. I wrote it, which is appearing in Impact in Chartered College.
Right. Yes.
The next June the 9th. So that's all there
Well,
as well.
Look out for that. We'll look out for that. Yeah.
Padlet, right. So again, I think I've seen that done really well in the Emirates, I have to say, where it was used in a drama lesson. And it's brilliant, because if you look at this, what it's doing here is that, you know, you can see the levels and the level of ability of the children who've contributed to this. So you've got something as basic as, I think it's inside this box, and you can see the spelling errors and so on. Monies, because I saw in whole June or whatever. Then you look at my hypothesis on the left-hand side, is that in the box there is money because in the whole I saw paper, etc., etc. Now that for a teacher is a fantastic starting point for adaptive teaching, because you can see what the children have come up with. And now it's up to you to think, well, okay, what do I need to focus on with June, with her writing? What do I focus on with Sharon? Because his writing is way above, and, you know, etc., etc. So for me, again, a Padlet it is a digital tool, but it's fantastic because it gives you questioning, critical thinking, reasoning, collaboration, because you could put people together after that, couldn't you? Again, in groups, and say, right, let's look at this now. And you could write a story about this. If it's primary school, which I imagine this is probably a year 6 or year 7, maybe.
I've seen some of these used in English to looking at analysing text, and really just what's the response, and then, you know, that kind of feeds that peer learning. So you saw that. Why didn't I see what you saw? What was it you understood? And that gets us into that deeper kind of learning.
And we haven't mentioned oracy skills, but I'm a big, you know, advocate of that. And I was part of the APPG on oracy skills, and we made the recommendation it should be across curriculum, but and assessed. But sadly, I think it's probably just going to go back into GCSE English now, which I think is wrong. It should be part of a curriculum. It should be, again, as we're both saying, you know, when you have an activity, it's that self-expression and oracy skills, and this lends itself, doesn't it, beautifully?
It does.
So,
and I think a lot of that has got to do with, you know, cross-curricular themes that we've known before that have been badly implemented. That I understand the reticence, but it doesn't mean that it's valid. We've got to see this as an overarching skill.
It is a skill, just like reading and maths, really.
Absolutely.
So hinge questions I love, and I've seen it being used brilliantly in science, in maths, in geography. But this, you know, is a perfect example, because you know what hinge questions do? They actually tell you what a student doesn't know and doesn't understand, but also what they have understood. You can then go deeper and say, if they get the right answer, it's not multiple choice, but if they get the right answer, you can then say the why question, can't you? Yeah. So why have you got there? How have you got there? If you can see that here the students not understood that volcanoes are caused by tectonic plate movement and can occur underwater, because that one says they're always on land, you know, and the students tick that. And that they're not just related to land masses, then, my gosh, they've missed out on there. What is a volcano, you know? So we've got to look at that and really start thinking, again, adaptive teaching. It's a wonderful way of a teacher noting down what it is that, you know, I need to work on with these pupils, and what these pupils can do now, and we can move ahead with them. That's true. If you want to call it, it's not differentiation, because it is adaptive teaching, but it's using the tools that I've just shown you, shared with you there, which can then trigger as a catalyst. They will start being your diagnostic tools that will help you then to develop the learning that you want from the pupils. I think that's it, isn't it? I think that's the
Yeah,
last.
yeah. You covered the teacher standards we've talked through. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Not just on that, so going back to the knowledge visualizer, or at least the learning visualizer, that the interconnectivity of learning and those other activities that you saw, these are so powerful for schools to get into, but it's got to be a school activity. An individual teacher is going to struggle. I mean, you might do that in your geography classroom or your science classroom, but you really do need to, and that's the mode that we have in the country. I'm just going to bring it because Dr. Tazos is obviously listening to us this morning. He's been very complimentary about he's emphasising IB.
Yeah.
And I will, Dr. Tazos, thank you for being here this morning. I will shout out to your newsletter on LinkedIn today, focusing on IB and its comparison with the English system. Go, if you haven't subscribed already, go and read it, because it's very interesting and it resonates with a lot of the conversation that Mina and I have just been working our way through. So thank you. Mina, I'm conscious of time and we've only got a couple of minutes left. And I said to you, if there was one thing, if you had the power to make a significant change and you could change one thing, what would you focus on?
I think what I've just been saying, I think my entire drift is about enabling all to achieve. So for me, it would be focusing on the learners, if it's through the curriculum and through our inspection process, but also importantly, an assessment process, which is ipsative. So you're not just saying, all children have to arrive at this standard by this age. So it's not age. It's stage, in the stage of where the child is at. So you start from their starting point, and then you look at what are they ready to do at a certain point and accredit that. So that's what it needs to be, a stepping stone before you can actually say, I failed 1/3 because you know what, they can't. Well, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They aren't going to get to that point, are they? And that's what I'd like to see change. The assessment process, a bit like the IB again. It's not, the IB is not a wonder accreditation. There's lots of things which I won't go into, which are wrong with it, which I know from talking to pupils and to teachers. But one of the things, it doesn't accredit at 16, but I think maybe the IB could do with some accreditation somewhere along the line, which just gives children, and that's what they were saying to me, gives them those kind of markers as to what they've achieved. And that's all our children need. They need to know, what have I achieved? So even an ASDAN certificate gives the child a sense of, I've done this, I've arrived here. Even the old-fashioned national record of achievement that young people had, I remember. That's that kind of thing, something that captures a portfolio of what children can achieve. And let's look at the positive, proactive, what you can achieve model, rather than where have you failed and what do you need to redo again because you failed. And that's what I think would make a seismic change in our education system if we did that. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, look, Mina, thank you very much for the conversation. It's been really, and I've just said there are so many conversations we could pivot off into, and so many thoughts around, pathways and outcomes and review and different styles of curriculum. And these conversations are really interesting and really powerful. Somebody said to me, well, what change can you make? Well, the reality is there's a million teachers out there who could do something in their classroom that would make a difference for an individual today, tomorrow, Monday morning. So that's the reason for doing it. Thank you for the conversation, Mina. I know we will continue to converse outside of this, but just to say thank you to everyone that's watching, whether you're live or whether you're watching afterwards. Please do engage with us if you want to know more about the work that we're doing at Smart Curriculum, or you want to follow the conversation a little bit further. There are contact details at the bottom of the screen. I haven't said during this podcast, if you want to like, share and subscribe, please do so on the various channels that we're broadcasting on. Please do get involved in the conversation. We are at a kind of inflection point where things that can change, and we can do things with our own agency as much as we're talking about children's agency. So please do come and join us. Our next episode will be in 2 weeks' time. Into June. Where's the year gone? It seems zipping past very quickly. But again, thank you to my guest today, Nina Wood. Please go and find her.
Thank you very much.
Secondary Curriculum Transformed, Enabling All to Achieve. And the other one, which we didn't quite refer to, but Beyond Belief, written with Andrew Morris. There's a chapter in there on the inspection and finding quality. So please do go and have a look at those two. But thank you for joining us today. We'll see you in a fortnight's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.